The penthouse was a fortress of glass and white marble, designed for a man who didn't let anyone get close. Yet there she was, the woman who cleaned his floors, lying broken in a pool of her own crimson defiance. Dominic didn't offer comfort. He offered a funeral for the man who touched her. Naomi knew the rules of the house. Mix the bleach with cold water, never hot, because hot water sets the blood deep into the fibers. Keep your head down, speak only when spoken to, fade into the wallpaper. She wasn't a hostage. She was an employee. The distinction mattered, even if the reality was blurred. 8 months ago, she answered an obscure ad for a private housekeeping gig that paid triple the market rate. The catch became obvious on her third day, when she had to mop up a trail of crimson leading from the service elevator to the guest bathtub. She had thrown up in the sink, washed her face, and finished the job. Poverty had a way of recalibrating your gag reflex. The penthouse belonged to Dominic. He was a Korean immigrant son who had violently unified the fracturing syndicates of the city under one banner. He adopted a Western name to navigate the old money circles of his business partners, but his ruthlessness was a language everyone understood. Dominic was 32, rigidly disciplined, and lived like a ghost inside his own sprawling, sterile apartment. The place was a monument to cold modernism, all steel, unyielding glass, and unforgiving white marble. It was a terrible canvas for a criminal. It showed every sin. Naomi made it spotless. In 8 months, Dominic had spoken to her a total of 5 times. Mostly they existed in a heavy shared silence. She was a black woman from the crumbling south side of the city. He was a kingpin who ruled it from the clouds. They were planets in entirely different solar systems, but occasionally their orbits crossed, like the Tuesday in November. It was past 2 in the morning. Naomi had stayed late to deep clean the kitchen grout. Dominic had walked in, shrugging off a ruined suit jacket. His knuckles were split open, the bone showing white through the torn skin. He didn't look at her. He just walked to the island, poured 3 fingers of scotch and swallowed it in one go. Naomi had stopped scrubbing. She stood up, grabbed a clean microfiber towel, ran it under cold water, and set it on the counter near his hand. She didn't say a word. She just went back to the grout. Dominic had stared at the damp towel for a long time. Then he wrapped it around his bleeding hand. "Go home, Naomi," he had said, his voice a low, gravelly scrape in the quiet room. That was it. No grand gestures, no cinematic romance. Just 2 exhausted people acknowledging the dirt they couldn't wash off. But something shifted after that night. A quiet current settled under the floorboards. When Dominic's lieutenants came around, the air in the penthouse always soured. They were loud, arrogant men who tracked mud onto her freshly vacuumed rugs and looked at her like she was a stray dog. Roman was the worst of them. Roman was Dominic's second-in-command, a heavy-set, volatile man who smelled perpetually of stale smoke and cheap adrenaline. Roman hated the quiet of the penthouse. He hated Dominic's rigid rules. Most of all, he hated that Naomi didn't flinch when he barked at her. "Hey, bring some ice." Roman snapped one afternoon, tossing a heavy duffel bag onto the pristine white leather sofa. Naomi paused her dusting. "Mr. Dominic prefers bags kept off the furniture." Roman stopped, turning slowly to look at her. He let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Mr. Dominic isn't here, sweetheart. I am. So get the ice before I decide you're not worth the paycheck." She didn't argue. She went to the kitchen, retrieved the ice, and set it on the table. She kept her eyes blank, her posture deferential but unbending. Roman watched her walk away, his gaze heavy and ugly. Naomi felt the familiar prickle of danger at the base of her neck. She had grown up around men like Roman, men who were terrified of their own inadequacy, who needed to break things just to prove they had hands. She told herself to ignore it. Dominic's house was a sanctuary, weirdly enough. Dominic didn't tolerate indiscipline. As long as she stayed in Dominic's shadow, she was safe. But shadows move when the light changes. Thursday afternoon was supposed to be empty. Dominic was out of the city, meeting with a harbour official down south. Naomi was using the quiet to polish the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The rhythmic squeak of the rag against the glass was the only sound in the apartment. Until the front door banged open, Naomi jumped, dropping the rag. Roman stormed into the foyer, followed by two lower-level enforcers. They were breathing hard, sweating through their shirts. Roman was bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheek, his eyes wide and frantic. A deal had gone bad. That much was obvious. The air in the room instantly thickened with the smell of copper and panic. "Lock the doors," Roman barked at one of the men. He paced into the living room, kicking a heavy glass coffee table. It didn't shatter, but it shifted violently, scraping against the hardwood. Naomi froze by the windows, hoping the afternoon sun glaring through the glass would wash her out. She just needed to slip into the kitchen down the back hallway and out the service door. Roman turned and saw her. The frantic energy in his eyes curdled into something pointed and mean. "What the hell are you looking at?" he spat. "Nothing," Naomi said, keeping her voice even. She picked up her supplies. "I'm leaving." "You aren't going anywhere." Roman closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising immediately. "You saw us come in. You're going to keep your mouth shut." "I don't know anything," she said, trying to yank her arm back. Panic flared in her chest, sharp and cold. "Let me go." "Or what?" Roman sneered, his breath hot and reeking of liquor. He was unraveling, looking for a place to dump his adrenaline. "You gonna tell the boss? You think he gives a damn about the help? You're a mop, Naomi. You clean up our messes. Get your hands off me." Her voice was louder this time, a command, not a plea. Roman's face twisted. He didn't think. He just swung. The backhand caught Naomi across the jaw. The force of it lifted her off her feet. She crashed into the heavy marble console table, the corner of the stone catching the side of her head, before she crumpled to the hardwood floor. A sharp, ringing whine filled her ears. The room tilted sideways. She tasted blood, thick and metallic, pooling in her mouth. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt like lead. Warmth trickled down her temple, dripping steadily onto the pristine white oak planks. Mix the bleach with cold water her dazed brain supplied. "Never hot." "Roman man, leave it," one of the enforcers muttered nervously, glancing at the door. "We gotta pack the cash and go." "Shut up," Roman breathed, stepping toward Naomi. He looked down at her chest, heaving. The violence had settled his nerves. He liked it. He reached down, grabbing a fistful of her thick, dark hair to drag her to her feet. Naomi gasped, her hands flying up to claw at his wrist. Then the private elevator chimed. A soft, polite ding that cut through the heavy air like a gunshot. Roman froze. The 2 enforcers stopped breathing. The heavy steel doors slid open. Dominic stepped out. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, an overcoat draped over his arm. He looked exhausted. His tie loosened, a dark smudge of fatigue under his eyes. He stopped. The silence in the penthouse became absolute. The city outside ceased to exist. Dominic's eyes swept the room. They registered the 2 trembling enforcers. They registered Roman standing in the center of the room. And then they dropped to the floor. To Naomi, she was on her knees, clutching her bleeding head, her dark skin coated in an alarming amount of red. The blood was dripping onto her collar, onto the floorboards she had spent months keeping immaculate. Roman dropped Naomi's hair. He took a step back, his hands raising in a placating gesture. "Boss, you're back early. We had a situation downtown. The Italians—" Dominic didn't look at Roman. He dropped his overcoat. It hit the floor with a soft thud. He didn't yell. He didn't pull the matte black Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster. The rage that radiated off him wasn't hot or explosive. It was absolute zero. It sucked the oxygen out of the room, leaving a suffocating, terrifying vacuum. He walked forward. His footsteps were measured silent against the wood. "Boss, she was getting in the way." Roman tried again, his voice cracking. He took another step back. "I was just—" "Don't touch her," Dominic whispered. The words were barely audible, but they hit the room with the force of a bomb. Dominic didn't stop walking. He didn't give Roman time to brace himself. When he was within arm's reach, Dominic moved with sickening efficiency. He grabbed the heavy crystal decanter off the nearby side table and swung it in one fluid, brutal motion. The thick glass connected with the side of Roman's knee. The sickening crack of bone echoed off the high ceilings. Roman screamed a high, reedy sound and collapsed. Dominic dropped the unbroken decanter. As Roman fell, Dominic grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket, hauling his dead weight back up, and drove a bare fist into Roman's face. Once, twice. The sound of cartilage flattening was wet and heavy. Roman went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head, blood spraying across the pristine white walls. Dominic let him drop. He turned slowly toward the two enforcers. They were pressed against the far wall, terrified out of their minds. "Get him out of my house," Dominic said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "If I see any of you in this city again, I will bury you under it." They didn't hesitate. They scrambled forward, grabbed Roman by his arms, and dragged his unconscious, bleeding body toward the service elevator. They left a thick red smear across the floor. The doors closed. Dominic stood alone in the center of the wrecked room. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate increments. His knuckles were split, again dripping red. He turned his head and looked at Naomi. She was still on the floor, leaning against the console table. She was trembling now, the shock wearing off, and the pain setting in. She looked at him, expecting the cold, detached monster who ran the city to turn that hollow stare on her next. Instead, Dominic's shoulders dropped. The terrifying glacial stillness shattered. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees, right into the pool of her blood, ruining his $1,000 trousers. He didn't care. He reached out his hands, hovering over her, as if he was terrified he might break her further if he made contact. "Naomi," he said. His voice was entirely different. It was raw, human, panicked. "Look at me." She blinked through the haze, forcing her eyes to focus on his face. The untouchable kingpin looked completely unmoored. "I'm okay," she rasped, though her vision was swimming. "You're not," he said, his jaw tightening. Gently, so gently it made her breath catch, he pressed his bare hand against the gash on her temple to stem the bleeding. His fingers were warm. "I've got you. I've got you." Dominic didn't wait for the paramedics. Men in his position didn't call 911, and they certainly didn't trust syndicate doctors with things they actually cared about. He slid one arm under her knees, the other supporting her upper back, and lifted her off the ruined floor. Naomi tensed, a sharp hiss escaping her teeth as the movement jostled her head. Her hands instinctively grabbed his shoulders. The fabric of his suit was soaked with her blood, the expensive wool sticky and ruined. He didn't seem to notice. His jaw was set so tight, a muscle jumped near his ear. He carried her down the long, shadowed hallway toward the master suite. Naomi had cleaned this room dozens of times, meticulously, aligning the heavy blackout curtains and polishing the dark walnut dressers. But she had never been inside, while Dominic was actually in it. The air here felt different. It smelled of cedar dry paper and the faint, sharp edge of his cologne. He didn't put her on the bed. He carried her straight into the massive slate-tiled bathroom and set her gently on the edge of the granite vanity. "Don't move," he ordered. The glacial calm was back, masking the panic she had seen downstairs, but his breathing was still too shallow. Naomi gripped the edge of the cold stone. The adrenaline was rapidly draining from her system, leaving behind a deep, nauseating ache. The right side of her face throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She watched him pull a heavy black tactical kit from beneath the sink. He threw open the latches. It wasn't a standard first aid box. It was a trauma kit packed with hemostatic gauze, surgical tape, and suturing tools. A stark reminder of exactly who was fixing her. He stepped between her knees. The physical proximity was jarring. For 8 months, they had existed 10 feet apart, speaking in nods and clipped sentences. Now he was occupying her breathing space. "I need to clean it," Dominic said. He ripped open an alcohol prep pad. "It's going to burn." "I know how alcohol works," Naomi muttered. Her voice sounded thin, lacking its usual gravel. A tiny, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Stubborn," he pressed the pad to her temple. Naomi inhaled sharply, her eyes squeezing shut as fire flared across her skin. Her fingers dug into the granite until her knuckles turned white. Dominic's left hand immediately came up, cupping the back of her neck to steady her. His thumb rested against her pulse point. His skin was warm. "Almost done," he said softly. She opened her eyes. He was focused entirely on the wound, his dark eyes narrowed in concentration. Up close, the terrifying aura that usually surrounded him dissolved into something deeply human. She saw the faint silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow. She saw the heavy exhaustion settling in the lines around his mouth. He wasn't a kingpin right now. He was just a man trying to fix something that was broken. "You didn't have to do that," she said. The silence in the room was too loud, and she needed to break it. Dominic tossed the bloodied pad into the sink. He picked up a small pen light and checked her pupils. "Do what? Beat him half to death?" Naomi flinched slightly as the light hit her eyes. "Roman is your second. He runs the docks." "Roman was my second," Dominic corrected effortlessly. He clicked the light off and reached for the gauze. "And no one touches what's mine, let alone bleeds them on my floor." The words dropped between them like lead weights. "What's mine?" Naomi's spine stiffened. The pain in her head briefly took a back seat to the cold spike of survival instinct. She was a girl from the South Side. She knew exactly what happened to women who became property to men with guns. They ended up in gilded cages, and eventually they ended up dead. "I'm your employee, Mr. Dominic," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the deference she usually forced into it. "I mop your floors. I'm not yours." Dominic paused. He lowered the gauze. His dark eyes locked onto hers, holding her gaze with a gravity that made her breath hitch. "You think I let just anyone into my house, Naomi?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You think I let just anyone see me the way you have drunk, bleeding, exhausted? You think I didn't know about the extra shifts you picked up, or how you always leave a glass of water on my desk when you know I've been working for 20 hours straight?" He leaned in closer. The smell of copper and cedar wrapped around her. "You haven't been just an employee since the day you pulled a knife out of my jacket pocket and washed the blood off the blade without blinking. You're the only quiet thing in my entire life. And Roman touched you." Naomi stared at him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. She wanted to look away to hide behind the invisible wall she had built between them, but she couldn't. He was seeing her, really seeing her. "He's going to retaliate," she said quietly. "He won't breathe past midnight," Dominic replied. It wasn't a threat. It was a weather report, absolute unchangeable fact. He stepped back slightly, breaking the intense spell, and pressed the gauze firmly against her temple. He taped it down with clinical precision. Then he finally looked down at his own hands. They were covered in her blood, mixed with Roman's. He turned on the faucet and shoved his hands under the cold water. Naomi watched the water turn pink and spiral down the drain. She felt a profound, terrifying shift in the foundation of her life. The rules of the house were gone. The invisible girl was dead. Dominic grabbed a towel and dried his hands. He turned back to her, leaning against the counter. "You're staying here tonight," he said. "I have an apartment. Your apartment has a broken deadbolt and a fire escape that rattles in the wind. You're staying here." He didn't phrase it as a question. He reached up his fingers, lightly brushing the uninjured side of her face, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly gentle. "I'll sleep on the couch." Naomi swallowed hard. She looked at the man who commanded an army of killers, offering to sleep on a leather sofa so she could feel safe. "Okay," she whispered. 4 days passed. The penthouse transformed from a sanctuary into a fortress. Dominic doubled the detail in the lobby downstairs and severed all ties with Roman's crew. The fallout was swift and violent, though Naomi only heard the echoes of it. A few muffled phone calls behind Dominic's closed office doors. A spike in the news reports about gang-related incidents down at the harbour. Naomi didn't clean. It drove her insane. She was confined to the guest suite, her concussion requiring rest and dim lighting. Dominic had brought in a private physician the morning after the incident to check her head, threatening the man with bodily harm if he breathed a word of her existence to anyone. The doctor had confirmed a mild concussion, prescribed rest, and left sweating. By Thursday, Naomi couldn't take the stillness anymore. The heavy bandage on her temple had been reduced to a neat strip of surgical tape. The bruising on her jaw had faded to a sickly yellow-green. She was wearing a pair of Dominic's sweatpants tied tight with the drawstring and one of his plain black t-shirts. She walked into the living room. The blood stain was gone. A professional crew had been brought in to strip and replace the ruined floorboards. The pristine perfection of the room mocked her. She walked into the kitchen, pulled a rag from under the sink, and started wiping down the marble island. She didn't care that it was already spotless. She just needed her hands to move. She needed the familiar friction of labor to ground her. "Stop!" Naomi froze. Dominic was standing in the doorway of his office. He had stripped off his suit jacket, his holster strapped across his broad chest. The white dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes deeper than they had been on Sunday. He walked over, reached out, and took the rag out of her hand. He tossed it into the sink. "I need something to do," Naomi said, crossing her arms defensively. "I'm losing my mind. Read a book, watch television, sleep." "I'm not your pet, Dominic." She used his name for the first time. The lack of Mr. felt heavy on her tongue. He noticed. His jaw flexed. "I never said you were." "Then what am I doing here?" Naomi demanded, stepping forward. The cynicism she had worn like armor her whole life flared up. "Roman is dead. The crew knows what happened. I'm a liability, a loose end. So what's the play? You keep me locked up in this glass box forever because you feel guilty?" Dominic stared at her. The air in the kitchen grew thick, heavy, with the things they hadn't said over the past 8 months. He stepped closer, backing her up slightly against the counter. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical weight. "Do you think guilt makes me do anything?" he asked quietly. Naomi held her ground, refusing to shrink. "Then tell me why." Dominic looked down at her. He studied the fierce, unyielding set of her jaw, the dark eyes that refused to be intimidated by him. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who either wanted to kill him or wanted to use him. Naomi just wanted to do her job and survive. She was the most real thing he had ever encountered. "Because the thought of you walking out that door and going back to a world where I can't guarantee you're breathing makes me want to burn this city to the ground," he said. His voice was completely devoid of romance. It was a raw, ugly confession. Naomi's breath hitched. She stared at the center of his chest, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I don't belong in your world," she whispered. "My world is blood and concrete," Dominic said, reaching out. He rested his hands flat on the marble counter on either side of her hips, trapping her in. "You're the only clean thing in it. I'm not letting you go back to the south side. I'm not letting you clean up other people's dirt." "I have to work," she argued, but the fight was draining out of her. "I have to survive. Survive with me." He closed the remaining distance. He didn't kiss her gently. There was no hesitation. His mouth came down on hers, hard and desperate, tasting of black coffee and suppressed violence. Naomi gasped against his lips. Her hands, which had been pressed flat against the counter, instinctively moved up to grip the lapels of his shirt. The kiss wasn't a fairy tale. It was a collision. It was messy, fueled by days of adrenaline and months of silent, simmering tension. Dominic's hands moved from the counter to her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her like a man starving, like she was the oxygen he had been denying himself. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. Dominic kept his forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed. "You don't clean anymore," he murmured, his voice rough. Naomi let out a shaky breath. She looked at the man holding her. He was dangerous. He was a killer. But as he stood there, anchoring her to the ground in a world that constantly felt like it was spinning out of control, she knew she wasn't invisible anymore. She had stepped out of the shadows right into the line of fire, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't going to run. "Fine," Naomi said, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "But you're hiring someone else to do the grout. I hate the grout." A low, genuine laugh rumbled in Dominic's chest. He opened his eyes, the coldness entirely gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable heat. He kissed her again, sealing the pact. The blood was gone from the floors, but the stain of their lives would always be there. They would just have to navigate it together. Did you feel the tension? Naomi and Dominic's story proves that sometimes the most dangerous men are the safest places to hide. If you loved this gritty, slow-burn mafia romance, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who love an obsessive, protective boss, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, dramatic audio stories delivered straight to your feed. Drop a comment below. What should we name Dominic's Syndicate? See you next time.